Day one, usually start the week with legs, get my least favourite thing out the way with. So usual activation kind of exercises, usually start with a bit of foam rolling, activation, some static stretches depending on where I need to work on. Usually it's about evening out imbalances rather than just stretching for the sake of stretching. And then on to some speed agility work. Legs again is not traditional kind of static kind of leg work. It's usually athletic kind of training, dynamic, and it's more fun. Singles on the box jump, single to single. Not an easy exercise. I just make it look easy because I'm so good. But yeah, this is progression because normally with box jumps and that kind of thing, you work on progressions, working up in the difficulty, starting from standard box jumps and then working on 2-to-1 landings, and then finally single to single, and sometimes added depth jumps. And then the first of the kind of exercises was the sled push, which is a real kind of high output exercise. And then onto my new favourite piece of kit, the safety bar, which means I can now start to squat safely without worrying about my shoulder, because my shoulder and the stiffness in the shoulder basically pushes my body around and ruins the squats. So obviously this is a seated safety bar squat. I like to again mix things up a little. Usually ramping up the sets and then finishing off with some accessory exercises, although I say this is a bit more of an accessory exercise. This is again a true single leg squat. Well, I say true, I'm giving it a bit of a touch, but it's just a depth check. I'm trying not to unload. So this is hip thrust, glute bridge, whatever you want to call it. The addition of the band, just obviously it makes the top portion of the movement more difficult, but it also engages your hip flexors and stops the kind of lumbar compensation that you might get with that extra kind of turn on the hips. And pretty stiff on the next day, so this was just mobility work. Just I spent maybe 10-15 minutes just stretching, doing some basic movements, nothing fancy. If you hate stretching as much as I do, then check out my 5-minute mobility series of videos. 5 minutes, just a simple follow along routine, 4 or 5 stretches. It's a good way of just keeping you engaged with stretching without having to spend too long on the movements. The main thing I've noticed as I've gotten older is I've generally gotten stiffer. So a few years back I reintroduced a lot of the mobility exercises back into my routine. Day 3, I was joined in my routine by versatile strength coach Hadi. He fancied joining in on my functional day, so I said, well, let's do it, push pull. This was weighted rows, single arm, elevated presses, supersets, short rests, back to back, 8 to 10 reps, all the way through. Y elevated, so you can feel the floor. It's you bring your core strength into it a lot. You bring it in a lot when you use a single arm, but when you do it across the bench, you really connect yourself to the floor. And when it comes to the functional days, anything you do that involves pushing usually involves contact with the floor. The same thing for pulling. It's only when you get to the gym that you start sitting down on things and lying down. It's an unnatural kind of movement. So keeping the floor involved recruits more muscle fibers, it brings the rest of the body in. It's not true strength training, but it's that bridging the gap. Incline press with a light pause, unload on the box. Difficult exercise. The pause really kills the movement, and you really want to use your hips to drive, but you limit the movement, you really brace the core and you drive through. Really, I need someone to hold me down on this, or have something underneath me, because I can't go any heavier than this, so I'm going to do a backflip over the bench. And the last exercise was, again, this is a good example, decline press, really, but it's adding rotation and it's connecting the floor to the movement. Think of it, when you push a car, you're not sitting on the floor pushing it, you're pushing it through the floor. And the usual, this one last time of the week, was the combat training. Prior to this, I'd done the first kind of rounds of sparring I've done for a long time. A little bit hesitant because I didn't have a gum shield, but it was good. A little bit out of shape, a little bit. There's a big difference between hitting the bag and hitting someone and being hit. It changes your breathing patterns, and it was nice to have a bit of a change. This is it, the end of the week. Standard kind of stuff. And I finished off this with just some rounds of kicking, just to work the hips a little bit, work on the hip power. And I finished with my kind of favourite go-to speed shoulder routine. High repetitions. I vary the weights and I vary the sets each time I do it, so it's a bit of a surprise, but basically it's lateral raises done at speed, upright rows and bent over rows, mainly because they're nice for the mirror muscles, but also in terms of I like to do it after I've hit the bag for a bit of endurance work.